with Mark Garner, Executive Director and Chief of Staff of the Downtown Yonge Business Improvement Area. Mark will lead a dynamic conversation about the state and evolution of Toronto's most famous and vital street. Mark Garner has been a successful business and community leader for more than 30 years and is now focusing his expertise and vision on the transformation of one of Toronto's most vital tourism and business hubs. So some quick housekeeping notes. Please make sure to ask any questions you may have or leave any comments in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we'll open up an audience Q&A at the very end of the presentation. Now, thank you so much for your time today, Mark, and take it away.
Thanks, Chantel. Afternoon, everybody. It's a privilege to be here just to talk about Canada's iconic Main Street. Obviously, Yonge Street has played a significant role in Toronto's legacy and history, but as well as, overall in Canada, this is a main street when people travel to Toronto, they come to Yonge Street to experience Yonge Street. So there's a lot of change that's before us, with the future of Yonge Street in regards to a lot of the work and redesign that we're doing for Yonge Street. But again, I think it's a very good time to be discussing about the evolution and future of Yonge Street and address some of the issues that we've seen in the neighborhood in the past, as well as the growth in the residential and commercial space, but also in the retail evolution. And to be supportive of that, it really is to plan out a great public realm that is supportive of the community and that Yonge Street remains the most iconic street in Canada and contributes significantly to the economic wellness of not only this neighborhood, but the city of Toronto. So on that note, I'll lead off, and I hope everybody jumps in on the conversation in regards to questions you may have, and I look forward to, at the end of the presentation, addressing those that come up. So thank you again. Yonge Street has been, as I mentioned, the iconic street. It is a place where Torontonians have convened for festivals and events and celebrations. This is a great photo of Yonge Street back in the day when it was VE Day. We were celebrating, obviously, the war and the celebration of closing off the victory in Europe. But also, I refer to this slide as the last time the Toronto Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup. It seems apparent. It seems like that model of car is pretty well indicative of where the Leafs are currently today. But it always has been this iconic street where people convene and celebrate. It also has been, through the late 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, it was the music mecca. It was the spot to which, everybody came to. This is where all the live theaters were and where all the movie houses were. It played a significant role in not only the music retail, but also the music sector in general for Canada and North America, with legendary venues up and down Yonge Street. And even today, this is an image of just Yonge Street just very few years ago when we activated the space with Scotiabank's Busker Fest in partnership with Epilepsy Toronto. These types of activations are what Torontonians like to come to Yonge Street for, is these types of activations. And you can see the street gets full. This type of festival and event that's on Yonge Street would normally generate around $50 million direct and indirect spend in the neighborhood. And we would, over the 4-day festival that we had on Yonge Street with just Busker Fest alone, brought in over 1,400,000 people over 4 days. So these types of festival events have always been there. We've had, events from Nuit Blanche. We were planning other events in regards to NHL's opening day and other musical events that have been on Yonge Street. The evolution of Yonge Street in a very short period of time is we saw a significant brand changeover. We saw 35 or more brands in a 48-month period. This is where brands such as Saks, Nordstrom's, Muji, Uniqlo, we had flagship offerings not only from Shoppers Drug Mart, from Samsung, from Rogers, all sort of infill the space. We had Michael Jordan open his store on Yonge Street. So the brand evolution and the retail experience is evolving very quickly and continues to evolve, and new brands are coming to the neighborhood. The other big component or change that we're seeing on Yonge Street is obviously the residential component. The growth is staggering. In the background on this slide, you'll see the Aura Tower and other towers being built further up Yonge Street by College. The Aura Tower, as I like to refer to it, is the tallest lived Canadian occupied condo today. However, on that corner alone, it will be one of the shortest towers on that corner because the Chelsea Hotel has submitted application for a tear down and rebuild, and you'll see 4 towers replaced there. 8 Elm Street is another location right on the corner of Elm and Yonge. An 80-story tower is proposed, as well as the southeast corner, Yonge and Gerrard, a large development's going in there as well. So the residential component is changing very quickly. And as I mentioned, there's 8,000 units on Yonge Street being constructed, just on Yonge Street. This is not off street, this is strictly on Yonge Street. And we'll bring around 14,000 more people living on Yonge Street in the next few years. And currently, 3,000 of those 8,000 are currently open and occupied. So the growth is staggering. We're going to see more people on Yonge Street. We've done significant things in the past as our BIA. Downtown Yonge has been very forward thinking in regards to the evolution of Yonge Street. We found out very early back in 2011 and 12 that the water pipe on Yonge Street needed to be replaced. So we started initiatives around Celebrate Yonge, where we narrowed Yonge Street down to 2 lanes, and we put out patio space and activation space. And it was really a transportation study to determine the flow of traffic in and out of the space, to understand if we were to narrow Yonge Street, what would it do to traffic volumes and pedestrian volumes. So our Young Love campaign was a very detailed 8-month consultation, which was open to the community. We did a lot of activations, not only on Yonge Dundas Square on street, during all festivals and events. We provided pop-up space where people could stop in a retail location, provide comment, and we allowed people to submit stories. And our younglove.ca website is still up. And if you haven't gone to that website, please do, and check out the stories that we generated in order to raise the conversation of what do people want to see? What do you love about Yonge Street? What do you hate about Yonge Street? And what do you see the future of Yonge Street? So we had over 18,000 interactions and stories and opinions brought into this consultative approach. This approach that we deployed has now become the standard as best practices for other cities, other municipalities, and other BIAs. We won a significant recognition award internationally for this type of consultation to make sure all voices were heard in the design and the future of Yonge Street. But one of the interesting points is, how do people come to our neighborhood? How do they arrive? And through this data, we were able to determine that it was very obvious that TTC played a very significant role. Our 3 stations, whether it's College Park, Dundas, and Queen, manage over 33% of the entire TTC traffic in those 3 stations on the Yonge line. You can see we're a very walkable neighborhood. People still come to our neighborhood via vehicles and cars, the use of cars, because we are a destination. People come down for festivals and events. They come down for shopping. We get a very, suburban sort of engagement in our neighborhood. People are coming for theater, Massey Hall for shows. There's lots of reasons why people come to our neighborhood. For those lucky enough to live in Toronto, then obviously 5% of the people that come to our neighborhood are cycling, and the other is 2% use cycling. So we talk about the ethical balance of how we provide access to the larger community. And I think this signifies where our vision has been on sort of setting the priorities. So through the conversation around Young Love, we heard very clearly from the community, we have to focus on walkability. Those streets, those curbs and sidewalks on Yonge Street have not changed. We have over 42 million people that walk north and south on Yonge Street on an annual basis, about 100,000 people a day. But even at Yonge and Dundas intersection, at our busiest moment, usually around August, 238,000 people will walk across that intersection in one day. So walkability needs to be there. It needs to be pedestrian friendly. It needs to have, benches, flower pots. The experiential needs to be very important in the future of Yonge Street. And as always, Yonge Street has always been a bit gritty, I would say, based on just the amount of activity that it sees in a day or in a weekend. People want to see it clean, but with clean comes clean and safe. And we've had a very long strategy that we've deployed as part of our neighborhood on the safe and inclusivity of our neighborhood. We want to make sure that Yonge Street is a place for all, no matter what your status is in life. And we want to make sure that those people that are experiencing homelessness are still supported and engaged in our Future Yonge Street. So you can see there's a lot of different components that came out of that around sustainability, renewable, flexible street, there's greening, various different things need to happen. And from that came a very results-oriented or focused approach for a 5-point action plan that really wants to see Yonge Street the greatest street for not only Canada, but specifically for Toronto. And we want to see Yonge Street made more highly walkable. Now, what I mean by walkable is there's a couple of key points that are under there. It definitely is widening the sidewalks. It decreases the number of vehicle lanes on Yonge Street. There's got to be more spaces for benches, trees, and seating areas. We need to improve our linkages between, the laneways that are just off of Yonge Street, because that connects into Ryerson or into other neighborhood associations. We need to improve our parks, and we need, a better connection between sidewalk and street. And then we wanted to prioritize, obviously, the heritage or legacy buildings, such as the Carlew, Mirvish, Massey, Roy Thompson, as well as Winter Garden Elgin Theatre. So then the second bullet point is around making Yonge Street truly flexible. And what does that mean? Is that it's pedestrian only during large festivals and events. And those large festival and events would be examples of Busker Fest, North by Northeast Festival. We used to have Manifesto on the square. Those would be great opportunities. Focusing on arts and culture through Nuit Blanche, through Luminato. So major festivals events would close Yonge Street and make it a pedestrian street. And that could be anywhere from 30 to 50 activations a year. We need to see operational flexibility. So that means better connections for water, so that when we do activate, where do you plug in the tents? How do we power wash the streets after we've used the streets? And it needs to have a better connection around public space and integration of public space. There also was a very clear message that came from the community around operational maintenance. If you're going to invest the money, we're going to invest on Yonge Street, we've got to make sure that we have the preeminent cleaning and operational best practices for the City of Toronto as the preeminent street. Third point was making us truly a complete street. And complete street is, advocating for better building form. We need better buildings when we're building on Yonge Street, paying homage to, obviously, the heritage buildings that are there, but the design principles for Yonge Street should be different than other neighborhoods. We wanted to install bike lanes, but again, as Yonge Street being a festival street, we see Yonge Street from basically Queen up to Gerrard Street as being that festival street. So what we've been promoting is bike lanes from Gerrard up to College, which will link into sort of the east-west connections at Gerrard, but also then continue on our bike connections that are down on Adelaide Street. The fourth was making Yonge Street a vibrant community, and really that is prioritizing arts and culture. We want Yonge Street to be the place for all Torontonians to convene. It's not just about merchandising or retailing, but through arts and culture will drive, the hospitality sector. People will come down, use restaurants, go shopping, go to a music venue. So arts and culture is the way that we're looking at the economics of Yonge Street and the future of Yonge Street. And then the last point is that inclusivity, and I touched on it briefly, which is prioritizing safe streets so that everybody feels welcome, no matter what time of day or night that you're on Yonge Street. It is sort of activating the laneways to make sure that that safety factor is there. Providing social supports for those clients that you see on street, the people that are experiencing homelessness and may not be as lucky as some of us, but how do we support those individuals within this neighborhood? And really it is, educating and advocating for more arts and culture and a balance of mixed income housing. Our neighborhood is one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the City of Toronto, and we pay very significant taxes based on what Yonge Street is today. So all this led to the City of Toronto Environmental Assessment, or EA study, that has been put forward, which is Young Tomorrow. And through that, all the work that we have done, all the reports we've generated, our traffic studies, all the on-street monitors we have now for pedestrian volumes and car volumes and cycling volumes, all fed into this consultation. And from that, you saw designs. Now, this is an official image of Yonge Street, an image that the City of Toronto Transportation Department, who have been a fantastic team member in the reimagining Yonge Street. This shows what Yonge Street would be in the future and could be in the future. So you're seeing those laneways narrowed, you're seeing pedestrians out, you're seeing patios, you're seeing greening initiatives. This has truly been a success for the BIA and the City of Toronto to come up with this Yonge Tomorrow recommendation and put this forward as the future vision for Yonge Street. Now, one of the things that has been a challenge in this project is there's been a lot of information out there in regards to Yonge Tomorrow, a lot of different images, but these are the City of Toronto supported images in the design. We'll be entering into what I refer to as the operational phase, which is then determining what does Yonge Street, where do the benches go, where do the tree pits go, and figuring out the potential logistics of that. So from that, this is what went through committee and council at the City of Toronto. It gives you sort of an impression. These are actual drawings in the report that was approved, which is attachment 8, which shows Yonge Street narrowed from 4 lanes down to 2. So what was approved was 1 curb lane forward going north and 1 curb lane forward south. And then we'll look at the flexibility. How does it get activated? When do we close it? What types of festivals and events would be allowed on Yonge Street? So there's a lot of policy that's going to be coming out of this because we want to make sure that the economics and the place for convening is maintained. It's an exciting time, and it's been a great working relationship with the City of Toronto, as I said, with transportation. But basically that's what's been approved. And now we need to figure out sort of the operational best practices. Things, as always, takes much longer than we would like to have, but again, where we're at in this cycle right now is the report to council went in February and it was approved. So now we get into what I refer to as the operational planning, further discussions in regards to, you know, how we're going to use it, why we would close it. Vehicle traffic will be maintained in the design that was approved, but pet zones would be there when there's activations, festivals, and events. There is a further design detail that will be coming out of this, which will be between the rest of this year into 2023. And then that report will go back to council for approval based on the finalized design and costing. And then we'll do the tendering and construction in 2023 to 2025, and it might go into 2026, because you never know in the City of Toronto, when you open the ground, what you're going to find. There's a lot of infrastructure services under Yonge Street that we need to address. So sometimes when we show pictures of big, beautiful trees that look about 40 feet tall, we may not be able to plant there until we get into the exact operational planning. But that's the timing. It's an exciting time for not only our neighborhood, but for all Torontonians, because it is time to reimagine Yonge Street to be that economic driver for the City of Toronto, and a place where Torontonians continue to convene for generations to come. So I thank you. Please, if you are not following us on social media or have signed up for our Young Buzz newsletter, please feel free to do so. There's the social media channels. And Chantel, open to questions on the future of Yonge Street.
Wonderful. That was great, Mark. Thank you for sharing. It looks like we have a question here. Oh, not a question, but a comment. I'd like to thank Downtown Yonge BIA for their continued support of Heritage Toronto. I sit on the board. I'm excited to see this unfold and make this an even more walkable street. That's a great comment.
Chantel, that's a great comment. And thank you for whoever submitted that. We believe in a lot of the heritage preservation. We do a lot of work with Heritage Toronto, specifically around plaquing legacy buildings and venues. And we have a long-standing relationship in providing walking tours. And this year we went from physical walking. 2020 and COVID provided us some new opportunities, and we sort of had risen to the occasion, and we both, Heritage Toronto did their walking tour now on digital, as well as the BIA has our digital walking tour as well, if you can't get into the physical space. So thanks for that.
Awesome. So I have a question for you. Which Yonge Street iconic landmark would you bring back if you could? I know mine would be Sam the Record Man. I bought my first New Kids and Madonna tapes back in the 80s. I used to love just like walking around and flipping through, all the records and tapes and then eventually CDs. So, we now see the sign at Dundas Square, they brought it back. Is there anything that you would bring back that you think would be this like iconic landmark that would be of interest?
Chantel, that's funny. Now you're dating yourself, you know.
I
You know
am.
exactly
Not too
where you
far.
were.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, you know, I always have a hard time answering that question because, you know, Yonge Street has played such an iconic role in my own existence as a Scarborough boy coming down here Thursday, Fridays, and Saturday nights and walking it. You know, the retail locations that you mentioned, do we miss Sam the Record Man? We do. It was a place where you convened. I can still remember lining up on Boxing Day to go buy vinyl based on there was only, you know, 7 copies of Fleetwood Mac's Rumors album that was going to be released that day. So I think the retail component around the music sector is big. I think we are entering into a time now where we're going to do more around music heritage and preservation. So we're bringing that music tourism back to Yonge Street. I miss a lot of the old performance venues. So I miss the Gasworks. I miss the, you know, the Rock Pile and the Masonic Temple. I miss all those places that used to line Yonge Street. So that's why we started a bit of the micro museums as well, telling the legacy. We've worked with our members to put iconic. So at the Shoppers Drug Mart at Yonge Dundas Square, there is a museum called the Friars Museum in there. So the Friars and the Nickelodeon and the Hard Rock Cafe that were all in that location played such an iconic role. I do miss, obviously, the Hard Rock being on our street. I mean, it was integral to so many. To Q107's had live performances there, broadcast studios. I miss their mac and cheese. I miss their burgers. So there's certain things you sort of miss, right? That has happened, but it has evolved, and I think we're on a good path for a different type of recovery and bringing back some exciting retail.
Right. So to that point, do you have any secret spots that you want to share with everyone here? Any spots that we should be aware of that we might have missed, you know, up Yonge Street? Any secret spots?
No, I think what's happened with the evolution, and I call it, you know, the Gerrard up to Bloor Street, or I would say let's go College or Carlton up to Bloor Street is what I refer to as the old last bastion of old Toronto. That's where the House of Lords used to be. That's where the Kit Kat, you know, various different stores used to be. Yonge Street has evolved. There's a couple of gems, and I mentioned like the Friars Museum. Finding those locations on Yonge Street are fun, but we really are the big brand street, right? With that retail evolution, I never thought I'd see the day that Saks would be on Yonge Street. I never thought I'd see Nordstrom's. A lot of the brands, the Mujis, the Uniqlos that have all shown up, obviously believe in the future of Toronto, but the future of Yonge Street, and have shown up in this location. Yeah, there's lots of gems. I always say to discover Elm Street would be the street I would say to everybody to discover, because that is our restaurant row. You know, Barbarian's Steakhouse have been there since I can remember, as long as I can remember, has been a mainstay for Toronto. But when you go to Barbarian's, you learn the history of what the building used to be. You know, one of the greatest stories that I hear from Aaron is the fact that Nureyev defected in that building, in that restaurant, the night that he was in Toronto, and then became, you know, came to North America. So all along that road, there's a Dega, Queen and Beaver, and if you haven't discovered those restaurants, those are the places that I recommend you should go, because some of the best eating in Toronto is on that street.
That's a great tip. Thanks, Mark. So we have a question or a bit of a topic, but curious, from Brian here. You mentioned that when you do construction under Yonge, it is hard to predict how long it might take since it's unknown what is below ground, right? Such an old area. So how did that situation happen where no one is sure what is below ground?
Well, Brian, it's a good question, and I think, you know, other great flex streets that I've seen built, you take into consideration what are all the conduits, all the supplies and services that need to be there, and try and clean it up. Over time, when Toronto was, you know, the last time Yonge Street was opened up was when the installation of the subway was put in. So you're talking late 40s, early 50s. So back at the time, you really didn't have a lot of policies or guidance or bylaws to sort of determine, you know, where services should be laid. So we know in our neighborhood, we've got some services that are only 18 inches below ground, and we've got things that are 4 feet below ground. And I think as we open it up, that's what we'll find. And I think that's going to be, once you open it up as part of the EA process and rebuild, you've got to address those issues on the spot. So that could, you know, obviously impact the delivery, and it could take longer. But there's a lot under Yonge Street. There's a lot of cables. There's, between gas lines, water lines, sewer pipes, there's a lot of infrastructure that's very close to the top of the surface.
Thank you. From MG, are there specific cities around the world that we're modeling after who have done an exceptional job of revitalizing their main streets?
Yeah, I think one of the reports that we provided the city that we looked at is we looked at high streets globally, and we looked at Exhibition Street in the UK. We looked at the Champs-Élysées. We looked at the Ginza district. We went through various different streets, Germany, Amsterdam, UK, in England directly, and also some streets, just close to home. We looked at, Spark Street. We looked at Stephen Street in Calgary. We looked at Dundas Street in downtown London, Ontario. There's a lot of good examples of what works and what doesn't work. And then how do you program? We can't just make a pedestrianized street without the investments and activations. We need to make sure activations are in place. And that's what we looked at. And we looked at sort of the evolution of retail based on those streets implementation. So it was a good breadth and depth of the streets we looked at, and we made sure we had a global component, and then want to pick the best practices. As I like to refer to, ROI in sort of the business world, return is basically an acronym for return on investment. But what we use it for is rip off and implement. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just got to find other streets that have done it, other cities that have done it, and make sure that you do it better than what they did.
And become the leader, right?
And become the leader, yeah.
So can you share more on the plans with taxes to save some of the smaller merchants who are iconic to Yonge? Yes, still Miss Nickelodeon, House of Lords, St. Charles Tavern, Gasworks, etc. So any plans to help save those businesses?
Yeah, I think the BIAs, and I'll say the core BIAs, so between Bloor Yorkville, Entertainment District, Financial District, Waterfront, St. Lawrence Market, and Downtown Yonge, we're all advocating on behalf of taxation relief to support not only small independent business, but obviously performance venues. Some of the taxation issues that we see with highest and best use is, if your neighbor sells their building and they got $15 million for it, whether you can sell your building for $15 million, that doesn't matter. That's what you're going to be taxed at. So we saw a significant increase over the years where we could see taxation increase on Yonge Street over 300 to 400%. So we've advocated very strongly to find taxation relief, and we also have advocated for special class taxation for a small independent business. And that is before council. It's a conversation that's being had right now, and how do we provide that relief? Not only, we were doing this work prior to COVID, it became even more important during COVID. And even as part of the recovery, when we come out of COVID, it's going to be a key advocacy role for all the BIAs and the community at large.
Wow. So what are some of your most memorable events that were hosted on Yonge Street? Any festivals, concerts?
Yeah, there's, again, a long list. I would say, I think one of the most iconic moments for me was specifically when we did NHL opening night. And we closed down Yonge Street in the section that I had mentioned, from basically Queen up to Gerrard. We took the stage off the Yonge Dundas Square and we put it up against the wall of the Eaton Centre, the entrance of the Eaton Centre, and the Tragically Hip played there for opening hockey night in Canada. And we brought in hundreds of thousands of people for that event. It really activated the street, and it was a great way to showcase. We've got a couple of new ones in the pipeline. We were supposed to do in partnership with Luminato last year, which was an entire takeover of all the signs on Yonge Dundas Square, which was an Ed Bertinsky exhibit. And Ed Bertinsky, if you don't know Ed, he is a Torontonian. He's a Ryerson grad, but he is also the most sought after global photographer around environment. And we have that planned again for this year. We couldn't do it last year because of COVID. But we have it planned for this year, and it's going to be an exciting event to see on Yonge Street for this coming year, and hopefully generates a lot of interest in the community around the bigger issue, other than COVID-19, is around global issues, global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, and I think Ed is a great partner to really showcase that in the community.
That's so interesting to look back at, tragically hip in hockey. You can't get more Toronto than that, right?
No more Canadian than that, right,
No more
Chantel?
Canadian. Yeah. So here's a question from Ben. Will you accommodate in any way for electrical vehicles, charging stations and such?
And that's interesting. I think we've done a good job around AODA compliance, but that's something I will put on my radar. I think it is a necessary step for us. We're providing, increased cycling infrastructure, i.e. increased bike racks for, is rolling out in spaces. We've done bike share increased in the area, but I think that is, we've got those issues to address as well. So I'll take that point away and make sure that's part of the operational planning. The other things that are coming is, electric bikes, scooters are coming to Toronto very soon. So the street is going to be very active with a lot of different types of users and a lot of different type of mobility devices. But I think you raise a very good point, is to ensure that we've got that.
And to that question too, I was going to ask, are there any plans around, opening new parks, little parkettes? You mentioned planters, trees, and potentially opening bike lanes, but are there any plans on opening, local parks, bringing in a little bit more green on Yonge Street?
Yeah, I think that's what we heard. The greening was significant. The challenge we have is based on the depth we can go, and I refer to them as politely as possible. We can't keep installing these popsicle or bubblegum trees, these little trees that only grow to whatever girth and whatever height. We've got to find a strategy that is more in keeping to what I refer to as State Street in Chicago. There's great plant material, a lot of greening initiatives, above ground planter boxes or permanent planter boxes, but also having movable planter boxes based on the seasonality. I see Yonge Street, if there's not a restaurant on street at a certain location, but you could put in a parklet with some sort of activations or arts and culture displays. Those are the things we're going to look at. And we want to link to our parks. So specifically Trinity Park in behind the Marriott and Eaton Center there is another great park in Toronto that people don't necessarily know about. We just spent $8.2 million on College Park, and that is going to be a main activation for us. We've got the first low emission CO2 outdoor skating rink, and we've got a lot of plans to activate that and link to green space. But then it also goes through our McGill Granby parks over towards Allen Gardens. So we want to try and create this green trail and a walking trail through the neighborhood as well, so that people can get out, exercise, and enjoy public realm space.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at some sketches of, new buildings in the future, you always see all these like green buildings with like parks on the rooftop and trees on everyone's balconies. Do you think there'd be any mandates around adding a little bit more greenery on all those new condos?
Yeah, I think that's the movement and where things are going, right? But again, the challenge is, I'm always afraid with a bit of that design, and it's just a personal thing for me, because if you've got green space in your own, I mean, I have my condo, I've got, obviously my patio and some green space there. But again, I think what's the evolution is we're creating on Yonge Street these vertical neighborhoods. And it does lead to isolation. If you don't have to go out, you won't go out. So we also want to make sure that while you have a beautiful place to live on Yonge Street, that you are coming out into public realm space and have that opportunity for community building. I've always used this analogy as part of some of the music summit work that I do around the future of the music sector is, if you're lucky enough to live in Toronto in a 2-story, 3-story neighborhood, you'll probably hear that, high school student practicing for band or something, or some sort of musician is practicing for his next gig at a performance venue that he's going to appear at. But if you're telling me these vertical neighborhoods don't have any artists in them, it's totally wrong. They're there. We just need to have them. How do we invite them out to get into public space? And that's why we launched our Play the Parks program, which allows emerging artists the opportunity to perform in public space so you can expose the community to arts and culture and music specifically.
That's a great idea.
But yeah, greener, greener, greener. We want to be the greenest BIA. We want to be the greenest part of Toronto. We push for, we actually have, Downtown Yonge produces its own honey. We produce our own honey because we have hives all around rooftops on Yonge Street, and you'd be surprised where they are. But we generate cases of honey that we distribute into the community.
That's so great to hear. You know, you think of city farming too. We were chatting with Fresh City Farms, and they're launching, I think, an 11-acre farm at Downsview Park. So when you think of what's actually happening in the downtown core, is just so interesting to hear. Is that accessible to the public? Can they find those beehives? Like, are there tours, or how can you
No,
purchase that honey?
well, we haven't purchased. We try to donate it to social agencies that are feeding the people on the street, or we use it as giveaways. If somebody would be interested that's on this, I would love to, provide that. So send an email through you, Chantel, over to me and make that connection, because we've got cases of honey and I'd love people. The hives are not accessible because they're on rooftops around our neighborhood, and specifically right in Yonge and Dundas neighborhood, blocks away from that center, because bees will travel miles and miles away and then come back. And we have very high producing aviaries for those things. Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah, so make sure to email me, and I'll
Okay.
relay the message to Mark. So from Derek here, do you work closely with the condo developers along Yonge? And what is usually your biggest ask from them to support the community?
Derek, that's a great question. And we found early on that we needed to be working with the developers, because what's evolving with Yonge Street is all those small independent buildings are now being sold, and they're being acquired by developers or REITs and redeveloped. And we wanted to make sure that through that redevelopment, that if you accumulated 18 doors on Yonge Street, you brought 18 doors back to Yonge Street. So we had the small independent retail being preserved to some degree. So we work with them directly. We advocate on a couple of different things. Community space. We want community space. We want great retail at grade. What is your retail strategy? How does it support the neighborhood and what the neighborhood wants to see in the way of goods and products? We also advocate a lot around the legacy venues on Yonge Street. A recent development that's coming at the corner of the southwest corner of Yonge and Gerrard, which is the old Elephant and Castle building. That developer listened to, and we worked with them directly, listened to us in regards to bringing back the Blue Note, which was one of the most iconic jazz venues in Toronto, in North America. The people that had performed there are just legendary. From Billie Holiday to Stevie Wonder, the list is endless. So we advocated for not only the micro museum to pop up, but also look at bringing that performance venue back. Because as we intensify the neighborhood, people want a place to go. They want to go out and listen to great music. So we've got to do those types of things. So it's community space. We need some arts and culture space that we need to be able to curate and turn over on a frequent basis. And then again, more space for the community to go out and listen to music and tell the story of music legacy on Yonge Street.
That's great. So from MG, if the Raptors win the championship again, they will this year, what do you think could make it more organized, safer, and better for a celebration experience this time around?
Yeah, MG, I think that's a great question. I think what we saw when the Raptors won their first was everybody comes to Yonge Street. Again, when the Blue Jays won their first, there was 80,000 people on Yonge Street, right? And when the Raptors showed up, I've got pedestrian volume counters that showed that we went from 4,000 people to 110,000 people on Yonge Street at any given moment in time. I think we need to be, and I don't like to put I don't like to be the fun police, but I think there's a little bit of policy and better planning that should be in place. We should have expected these types of things. We should have had activations. We could have closed the street, and there could have been other activations about the Raptors. There could have been giveaways. There's a lot of things that we can do, and I think that's what we need to do better as a city when our teams do win. Iconic trophies based on the team that's there, that we've got to find a way to embrace it and really plan better for those types of activations.
Yeah, that's something to think about. I can't even think of that many people in one place right now, but that's the COVID mindset. But we're looking forward to next year, and hopefully the Raptors will win again. So looking forward to that. So from Shamima, what's up and coming and exciting at Yonge and Eglinton? Anything new there?
Well, it's a little bit outside my boundaries. There's a new BIA that's been formed there in partnership with Slate Developments. And Mackenzie, who's running that BIA at Yonge and Egg, is, I should say Yonge and St. Clair as well, I believe. Yonge and Eglinton has changed a lot over the years. The development and density that's gone into that space has been massive. But there's a lot of interest between, some of the large property owners like RioCan that want to do activations, pop-up activations, whether it's, we have a neon museum that the BIA basically owns, and we take around to showcase. We've had a lot of conversation around arts and culture pop-ups, digital pop-ups, museum, specifically music and neon. So those are the things we're looking at. But the development at Yonge and Egg is going gangbusters, right?
Yeah, that's very exciting too.
Yeah.
So I think that's all we have for questions. I actually have one last one. So, Yonge Street's been hit very hard during COVID, and I know that it's closed down a lot of businesses. So what does, now that this week things are reopening, what does the future of Yonge Street look like within even just the next 6 months to a year? What's the big overall vision of that space?
Yeah, in our neighborhood, and Chantel, that's a fantastic question, because I think that's part of what feeds into even the conversation we're having today is what is the evolution? Where is the retail going to be? We lost a lot of brands based on COVID-19, and we learned very quickly that the economics of our neighborhood cannot be sustained just by the people that live in our neighborhood. And as an example, the employment cluster. People forget that the Eaton Centre is the preeminent shopping destination in the city of Toronto, but it also has 3 large employment clusters attached to it. One on Yonge Street, one on Dundas, and one on Queen. And with this work from home based on COVID, normally the employment cluster in Toronto would operate around 80% occupancy. And that means, we're never 100% because there's people that are on vacation, they're traveling for business and other things are going on. But normally we would run around 80%. At the high point during COVID, that employment cluster ran at 10%. And at its lowest, it's at 4%, currently at 4%. So you realize that this type of neighborhood in Toronto needs to have the employment cluster come back to support the retail that's on street. So we lost the Pickle Barrel, we lost the McDonald's, we lost the Swiss Chalet, we lost a bank branch, we lost all our restaurants with Surcorp at Yonge and Egg, or at Yonge and Gerrard, that had been there for 10 years. So we see that when we come back and those economics coming back, not to mention the Ryerson students, because they generate over $30 million for us as well, that when that comes back and we open back up and everybody's vaccinated and we start having fantastic festivals and events on Yonge Street, then you'll see the economics and the retail will recover. It's evolving now. It's hard to believe that even during this pandemic that there is retailers that are growing their offerings. As an example, even one of our own members, Alan Liu, that owns Salad King, has opened up a new location on Queen Street. So, during a pandemic, expanding business, and I think it will survive. I think the main thing for us that we want to see coming back, which is going to support the hospitality sector, obviously the hotels and restaurants, is live theater and live music. When Massey Hall opens back up again, because that renovation will be done later this year, so we could be in concerts again at Massey before end of year or early next. And again, with the theaters, with the Mervis Theatre opening up or in Winter Garden Elgin, are key draws. We started prior to COVID as Hamilton was appearing at the Mervis Theatre on Yonge Street, and then within a month it was shut down. There is a big announcement coming for Harry Potter at Mervis, which will not have an end date. It could run indefinitely because there's only 3 places in North America that Harry Potter will be visible. It's New York, San Francisco, and Toronto. So there's a lot of good things that are happening. And then with those types of economics returning, then you'll see the retail return. We'll see some new big box stores come into the area. We'll see different brands that have been, obviously excited about coming to this neighborhood, start to, acquire space, start to do their build-out leases, and Yonge Street will survive. It's always survived. I always say that Yonge Street is sort of the pulse of, Canada. Whatever was happening on Yonge Street is sort of happening in the community. And I think the future is bright as long as we get the employment cluster back and we start being able to convene people again, because I think we're all COVID exhausted and we all want to be on Yonge Dundas Square to see a concert, for sure.
No, you're absolutely right. And you know, you're talking about all these, you know, theaters reopening, and we haven't really discussed tourism and how much that's impacted Yonge Street in the last, you know, hundreds of years. And you're thinking of how many people come to Toronto just to potentially watch that Harry Potter show. So how optimistic are you with tourism coming back into the city and really driving the reopenings of all those stores and hotspots?
You know, we're all, Chantel, it's a good question, because it's like we're all staring into this crystal ball trying to figure out where is it all going to go? What are we all going to be able to do? But one of the promising things that we had seen announced this week is New York City is opening their theaters again. So Broadway's opening up to 30% capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So if we get to that phase based on our numbers, then we can start opening theaters again. I work directly with TAPA, which is the Toronto Alliance of Performing Artists Associations, that represents all these great theaters in Toronto. And we're pushing for that. We've got to open back up. And I think, you know, from my own personal perspective, I think tourism is going to, you know, it's going to be gangbusters. I think we're all waiting to travel again. I think we were all thinking of, okay, now when I can get on a plane again, here's where I'm going to go. And I think tourism, that hospitality, air flight, hotel stays, all those things will be a key economic driver and will rebound very robustly once we're all able to move about the planet again.
That's just so exciting. So let's hope this is coming soon to Toronto too, and the future is looking good. So thank you so much for your time today, Mark. This was amazing. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you, Chantel, and thank you, everybody. I hope you found it informative and inspiring. Follow us on the future and the evolution of Yonge Street by all means.
Thank you. Please do. And please stay safe, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And I hope to see you all again soon for a next conversation and virtual event. Hopefully we can all see each other in real life very soon. So thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chantel. Thanks,
you.
Irene.